What if I told you that sometimes the most damning evidence can hide in plain sight for 7 years? That a single drop of blood, smaller than a pencil tip, could finally solve one of Houston's most controversial cases?
No 12-year-old should have to wake up and find out that both your parents are no longer here.
When I went back to school, I just kind of felt out of my body, really. They would talk about stuff, and I couldn't tell you what was being said because my mind was just gone. I would think about my parents. I would think about AJ.
Did she ever ask you point blank if you killed your parents?
No, she doesn't need to. She knows me.
Not a single doubt in my mind he couldn't have.
Nothing could ever be said that would make me believe that AJ killed my parents.
This is the story of A.J. Armstrong, a case that would divide juries, tear apart a community, and ultimately be decided by evidence so microscopic it was nearly invisible to the naked eye. July 29, 2016, Southeast Houston. The Armstrong family seemed to have it all, the American dream personified. Antonio Armstrong Sr., a former Miami Dolphins linebacker who'd overcome career-ending ankle injuries to build a fitness empire. His gym, first-class training, was more than a business. It was his mission to transform lives. Dawn, his wife of over a decade, was his perfect partner in business and life. Their Bel Air home was a testament to their success, a sprawling house where family gatherings were legendary. Antonio Jr., known as AJ, was following in his father's footsteps as a star athlete, the big man on campus who seemed destined for greatness. 12-year-old Kara was the family's princess, adored by everyone. But at 1:40 a.m., that perfect facade shattered with a single phone call.
Bel Air 911, where's your emergency?
I'm at on Meadow Street. I just heard 2 gunshots downstairs in my parents' room.
Okay, what's that address one more time?
The voice on the other end was calm, almost eerily so. It was A.J. Armstrong reporting gunshots in his parents' bedroom. During the 16-minute call, there were strange pauses, barely audible whispers, and an odd detail. AJ complained of ringing in his ears. What the dispatcher couldn't see was the horror that awaited first responders. Antonio and Dawn Armstrong shot execution style in their bed, pillows covering their faces. The killer had been methodical, using Antonio's own .22 caliber pistol from his bedside drawer. Dawn had been shot twice behind the ear, so close together the wounds almost overlapped. Antonio, perhaps awakened by the first shots, had been shot once in the head. Dawn was already gone. Antonio clung to life, but would die hours later at the hospital, never knowing his son had been arrested for his murder. The house told a strange story. No signs of forced entry. The security system still armed. Kitchen drawers pulled open, but nothing missing. A handwritten note on the counter. "I have been watching you for a long time." And most chilling of all, Antonio's own gun left beside the bodies. Within hours, police made a shocking decision. They arrested the couple's 16-year-old son, A.J. Armstrong, for capital murder. Picture this. You're a star high school football player, beloved by coaches, dating your dream girl, living in a mansion. Why would you murder your parents in cold blood? That's exactly what investigators had to prove, and the evidence they found painted a disturbing picture. The security system was the prosecution's ace. Every door and window monitored, motion sensors throughout the house. The logs showed no external doors opening for hours before the murders. No windows disturbed, no intruders detected. The only people who could have been the killer were already inside the house when the system was armed at 9:52 p.m. Cell phone records told a chilling story. AJ had been texting his girlfriend Kate until 1:02 a.m. when his phone was placed on the charger. At 1:08 a.m., the phone was lifted from the charger but not unlocked. 1 minute later, the second-floor motion detector activated. Over the next several minutes, the phone screen turned on and off repeatedly. Prosecutors argued AJ was using it as a flashlight to navigate the dark house. The murders occurred during the only 38-minute window all day when AJ wasn't actively using his phone. At 1:25 a.m., the living room motion sensor activated when prosecutors believe AJ planted the threatening note and gun in the kitchen. Then silence until the 911 call at 1:40 a.m., but it got stranger. Police found a bullet hole in AJ's bedroom ceiling directly above his parents' room. When confronted, AJ admitted he'd fired his father's gun weeks earlier, showing off to a friend. Investigators found bullet holes in pillows and blankets in his closet, what they believed was a practice run. Then there was the burn mark on the carpet near the stairway, reeking of gasoline. AJ claimed he'd accidentally dropped a match while playing around. Investigators theorized he was planning to block escape routes with fire. They found an empty bottle of rubbing alcohol in his room, and both AJ and his father had noticed a gasoline smell in the house days before the murders. The motive? Text messages revealed growing tension, but also something more disturbing, a pattern of manipulation. Dawn had written about AJ. "He is a bold-faced liar like I have never seen before." She'd described feeling heartbroken by his deception, writing, "All you do is lie to us, scheme behind our backs." But investigators found something even more troubling in AJ's browser history: searches about inheritance laws and life insurance policies. The family had substantial assets, and AJ stood to inherit significant wealth as the surviving son. But here's where it gets complicated. Other texts showed a loving relationship. 90 minutes before the murders, AJ was texting his girlfriend about love and marriage. His defense attorney would later say, "That's totally inconsistent with someone who's angry, suicidal, homicidal." The physical evidence was puzzling too. No gunshot residue on AJ's hands or clothes, no blood spatter, no bloody clothing found anywhere. If a 16-year-old committed this crime, how did he clean up so perfectly? Most damning was AJ's own 911 call. Prosecutors claimed you could hear him whisper about a high-pitched ringing in his ears. Exactly what happens when you fire a gun without ear protection. But AJ had another explanation entirely. "I saw him running, like I saw him running." 5 hours after the murders, AJ Armstrong told police he'd seen a masked intruder fleeing the scene, but he hadn't mentioned this crucial detail during his 16-minute 911 call. Why? His defense team had an answer. AJ was protecting someone he loved, someone he couldn't bear to see arrested. Enter Josh Armstrong, AJ's older half-brother, Dawn's biological son from a previous relationship. In a shocking twist, AJ's defense attorneys pointed the finger directly at Josh during the first trial. The evidence was compelling and disturbing. Josh had been diagnosed with schizophrenia after the murders. He'd been in and out of psychiatric facilities, reporting paranoid episodes and violent thoughts. His ex-girlfriend testified that Josh had seemed different after returning from college, that his parents treated him like the black sheep of the family. Most damning, Josh's own medical records showed he'd claimed to have witnessed his parents' murders, describing details only the killer would know. He spoke of seeing blood, hearing gunshots, and being in the room when it happened. Was this a confession wrapped in the language of mental illness? His ex-girlfriend Hannah Pylon's testimony was devastating. She described Josh's dramatic personality change after returning from college, his increasing paranoia, and his obsession with perceived family favoritism. The night of the murders, Josh had immediate access to the house. He lived just blocks away and had keys, but the prosecution had their own expert testimony about Josh's mental state. Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic psychiatrist, testified that Josh's schizophrenia was likely triggered by the trauma of his parents' murders, not the cause of them. His detailed memories of witnessing the crime were classic symptoms of PTSD-induced false memories, not actual recollections. Then came another bombshell, claims that Antonio Armstrong had been involved in a prostitution ring. Family friend Maxine Adams came forward with allegations of shady associates, death threats, and criminal connections. The defense argued this information had been withheld by the state. Investigators found the claims unsubstantiated, but it raised questions. Days after the murders, the Armstrongs' gym was burglarized. Coincidence or connection? The first trial ended in deadlock, 8 jurors voting guilty, 4 believing in AJ's innocence. The second trial in 2022 also ended in mistrial, This time, 6 jurors favoring acquittal. 2 juries couldn't agree. Was A.J. Armstrong a cold-blooded killer or a grieving son being railroaded by the system? The prosecution knew they likely had only one more chance to get justice for Antonio and Dawn Armstrong. They went back to the drawing board and made a discovery that would change everything. 7 years. That's how long a tiny piece of evidence sat in a police evidence room, overlooked and forgotten. After 7 years of investigations, accusations, and 3 trials, prosecutors say they have finally found justice for Antonio and Dawn Armstrong. In 2023, as prosecutors prepared for their 3rd and likely final attempt at conviction, blood pattern analyst Sergeant Celestina Rossi made a routine review of the physical evidence. She was examining AJ's shirt from the night of the murders when something caught her eye. A visitor's badge, the kind police stations put on civilians during questioning. It had been stuck to AJ's shirt when he was first brought in for questioning. Rossi peeled back the sticker and found something extraordinary: tiny reddish-brown stains on the adhesive backing. A.J. Armstrong's t-shirt was retested after authorities said flakes of blood were discovered under a Houston Police Department visitor's badge he wore the night his parents were murdered in 2016. The preliminary tests indicated blood, but whose blood? The sample was rushed to the Houston Forensic Science Center for DNA analysis. The results were stunning: a single-source match to Antonio Armstrong Sr. How did Antonio's blood get under that sticker? Rossi had a theory that would horrify the courtroom. When Antonio was shot, his lungs filled with blood. As he struggled to breathe, tiny droplets of blood were expelled and landed on his killer, droplets so small they were nearly invisible, each about the diameter of a mechanical pencil tip. They stayed there until this sticker was placed on there, which preserved those stains, Rossi would later testify. The defense was blindsided. Defense attorney Rick DiToto later said the timing was suspicious. Why was this crucial evidence discovered just before the 3rd trial? After consulting with AJ and multiple attorneys, they made a calculated decision. They would let the evidence in rather than appear desperate by fighting it. DiToto argued cross-contamination, pointing out that evidence had been handled by dozens of people over 7 years. He questioned why no other blood was found on AJ's clothing, skin, or hair if he'd been close enough to be splattered during the shooting. But Sergeant Rossi had answers. She explained that the droplets were so small they were drying even as they flew through the air. When they landed on AJ's shirt, they didn't soak in. They sat on the surface like tiny scabs until the visitor's badge trapped and preserved them. The prosecution argued this wasn't just blood evidence, it was proof AJ had been present when his father was dying, close enough to be touched by Antonio's final, desperate breaths. But the prosecution finally had their smoking gun. In 2023, the 3rd trial concluded with a unanimous decision, finding A.J. Armstrong guilty of the murder of his parents. This verdict came after more than 10 hours of deliberation, marking the end of a tumultuous and lengthy legal journey. A.J. Armstrong, now 24, showed no emotion as the verdict was read. Judge Kelly Johnson immediately sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. As bailiffs led him away in shackles, his grandmother Kay Winston collapsed in sobs, crying out, "They got the wrong person." The conviction brought mixed reactions from the community. Antonio's former NFL teammates expressed relief that justice had finally been served. Dawn's family, who had remained largely silent during the trials, issued a statement saying they could finally begin to heal. But others questioned whether justice had truly been done. Criminal defense attorneys across Houston criticized the prosecution's reliance on evidence discovered 7 years after the crime, calling it unprecedented and potentially dangerous for future cases. "I believe I'll be acquitted," A.J. Armstrong told KPRC2 in an exclusive prison interview. Even after conviction, he maintains his innocence, insisting the blood evidence was planted. Armstrong has already filed a notice of appeal, and he filed a civil lawsuit against the city of Houston, accusing police of planting blood evidence to sway this 3rd jury. But the story doesn't end there. In May 2024, AJ's case took another dramatic turn that could potentially overturn his conviction. The Harris County District Attorney's Office informed Armstrong that his case may be associated with a forensic analyst who was terminated for faulty work. The fired analyst, whose identity hasn't been publicly released, had worked on DNA evidence in dozens of cases over several years. An internal investigation revealed pattern of contaminated samples, mishandled evidence, and potentially falsified results. Defense attorneys across the county began filing motions for new trials based on this revelation. Armstrong's legal team immediately seized on this development. They filed an emergency motion arguing that if any evidence in their case was handled by this analyst, the entire conviction should be thrown out. They're demanding access to all lab records and chain of custody documents related to the blood evidence that convicted their client. Meanwhile, Armstrong's personal life has crumbled. His wife, Kate, who stood by him through 3 trials and testified in his defense, filed for divorce in December 2024. Court documents revealed the strain of his conviction, mounting legal bills, and the impossibility of maintaining a marriage with someone serving life in prison. Their young son, now old enough to ask questions, has been told his father is away at work. Kay Winston, AJ's grandmother, who has been his most vocal supporter, broke down during a recent interview. "That baby asks for his daddy every day. How do you explain to a child that his father is in prison for something we know he didn't do?" The divorce proceedings have been contentious, with disputes over Armstrong's limited assets and the rights to his story. Kate has reportedly been approached by several production companies interested in her perspective on the case, though she has declined all offers. AJ Armstrong's request for a new trial has been denied by the courts, but his appeals continue through the system. The case that captivated Houston for nearly 8 years refuses to quietly fade away.